This is an RNZ podcast.
Just a quick warning, this podcast contains descriptions of violence some listeners might find confronting. I want to take you back to the early afternoon of the 8th of January 1985. It's 2 days after Darcy Te Hira was killed, and police are wrapping up their interviews with Mount Eden inmates. In a cell in the prison's south wing, a prisoner I'm calling Danny sat down with a detective. Danny was 29 and doing 15 months for receiving stolen property. He had some sway amongst the inmates and was something of a spokesman for his prison wing. Danny told the detective he knew Darcy quite well from having spent years behind bars with him, but he said they weren't particularly close. Then he mentioned,
I don't know who did it, but I will find out. Then I'll take care of it myself. The only way to settle it is to pay back.
This piqued the interest of the interviewing detective, who asked if anyone would have it in for Darcy.
Hard to say. I don't know. He was a good fella. I don't think so.
That was the end of the discussion. The detective then made a note to himself.
Danny appeared to know more than he was willing to say.
Turns out he was on the money. 5 years later, Danny was now willing to say more, because apparently he had a confession to make. You're listening to Nark, an RNZ investigative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wesley-Smith. This is episode 15, A Confession.
And came in and basically said, do you mind if we have a chinwag?
If it was true, then it had a big effect on other people's lives. And if it was inaccurate, it would be up to the police to find out and investigate it.
In early November 1990, 2 prison guards we've met before were sitting in their office in Wing 5 of Pāremoremo Prison. One was Mark Anthony.
The officer and I were on together on that shift, which was a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift.
And the other was Dominic Malcolm.
It was a stormy day, I do recall that.
Just weeks earlier, Ross Appelgren's murder conviction had been overturned. Mark recalls at the time there'd been a lot of news coverage about the case.
The court agreed, quashed the conviction and ordered a new trial. Almost immediately.
Mark says Danny appeared at the door to the office. Until now, Danny has only been a bit character in this story. His name first came up as someone who might have been working with Darcy to move drugs around Mount Eden. In 1990, Danny was himself days away from release, and Mark said he appeared to have something he wanted to get off his chest.
We chatted away and we talked about old times because I knew from Mount Eden.
In my interviews with them, Dominic and Mark referred to Danny by his real name, so we've bleeped it out to protect his identity. This is the first time Dominic and Mark have spoken to the media and described in their own words what you're about to hear. No jury has heard it either. And just so you know, both men have sworn affidavits confirming their accounts.
And then he started up with the Ross Appelgren thing and then just opened up.
Now, I hadn't ever worked over at Mount Eden at all, so I didn't have a big understanding about it. But what I did say was that Ross Appelgren had been convicted for using a paddle out of the kitchen to kill Darcy Te Hira. And he stood there categorically and said, Appelgren didn't do it.
He nominated the inmate that he said actually did do it, and said that he was part of it. And then it was when he revealed that Darcy Te Hira was supposed to have only taken a warning shot to the back of the head.
Mark says according to Danny, Darcy hadn't been attacked with a paddle, but another weapon that was then taken out through the west wing of Mount Eden and disposed of.
Immediately he said that it was nothing to do with Appelgren.
Appelgren didn't do it. Had organised the hit, and he said he organised it with an inmate by the name of...
That last bleep is the real name of the inmate Danny says fatally struck Darcy. That's the inmate I'm calling David, another who was a bit character until now. His name first came up when Ernie told police David was one of the inmates, along with Ross, whose drugs had been ripped off by Darcy. Ernie also alleged that David had worked with Gordon to help Ross commit the murder by blocking the view of prison guard Jim Steadman. David always denied Ernie's claims, but here was Danny saying David was actually the killer. So why then had Danny ordered the hit?
He said that he was running the drugs where it was Mary Jane or whatever it was, the marijuana or whatever. He was distributing from the Dome as the Dome runner. He freely admitted that.
Just a reminder here, the Dome runner, which was Danny, delivered the meals, and sometimes, so I'm told, drugs to the cell wings in Mount Eden. And according to Mark, Danny said Darcy was his supplier.
And that allegedly Darcy Te Hira was taking a bit for himself before the rest was coming through into the prison.
And Danny only learned of it from a woman who came to see him in prison.
And so to say he arranged for to do the bashing?
Correct. And I think the hit on him was basically not so much to knock him out or whatever, but to just give him a shot saying, we're onto you, bud, sort of thing.
Didn't expect Darcy to actually die.
Now, I haven't been able to track down David to get his responses to Danny's allegation. But was Danny just talking shit? Spinning a yarn, maybe? Well, Dominic and Mark say no.
I had no doubt in my own mind at that time what he was saying was the truth.
So did you believe he was telling the truth?
I believe that, yes.
And I suppose, is it true to say that as a prison guard, for the period of time you were a prison guard, you came to know the difference between when an inmate was just spinning a yarn and perhaps telling the truth?
Correct. And I know that he would be at times trying to exaggerate his own importance, but at the time it was just casual reminiscing, basically. So he wasn't taking his time to figure out what he was going to say as far as his story. It just came out as the conversation came between him and I. So it also led one to believe that he was telling the truth.
Mark had another reason for thinking Danny wasn't making this all up. He told me back when the murder happened, some staff actually thought Danny could have been involved.
He had access, almost unlimited access, down to the kitchen and back up again because he was a Dome runner. He was able to move through the place with relative ease.
Again, people might think, why would someone like who seems to have been pretty street smart, why on earth would he have come up to two prison officers and said what he said?
Because he would have most likely thought to himself, it's all water under the bridge. It's, things gone by, nothing's ever going to come of it.
After Danny finished his chat and left their office, Mark and Dominic stopped to process what they just heard.
Had given us good information in the past, and Mark Anthony and I just felt it was too important. If it was true, then it had a big effect on other people's lives, and if it was inaccurate, it would be up to the police to find out and investigate it. So that's how I came to the conclusion that it should be passed on to the police.
A few days after the conversation with Danny, Mark said he called the Auckland Central Police Station.
I just asked to speak to someone in relation to the Ross Appelgren thing. So they would have got me through to the person who was associated with that case.
Who Mark actually spoke to became a matter of some controversy. We'll come to that later. What you need to know for now is that Mark can't recall exactly when he contacted police, but is confident it was in the first 2 weeks of November 1990. Then, a couple of weeks later, on December the 12th, a detective sergeant called Paul Carpenter rang Mark back. I know about this call because Detective Carpenter wrote a police job sheet recording what Mark told him about his discussion with Danny. But remember, Dominic was also present when Danny confessed.
I didn't get interviewed over it, I don't think, at that time. I thought it was so serious that the police ought to have acted on it straight away, but they didn't. So to me, they didn't take it seriously whatsoever.
I also haven't been able to find any record that Dominic was interviewed by police at this point, that is, late 1990. Carpenter, though, did track down Danny on the 25th of January 1991. Danny, by this point, was back in Mount Eden prison on other charges. Carpenter's notes of his discussion with Danny are surprisingly brief. And crucially, Danny's story differs from what he'd told Dominic and Mark. Now, going by Carpenter's notes, Danny says that David, who got ripped off along with Ross, was the one who ordered another inmate to do the hit.
David got ripped off by Darcy, arranged for him to be taught a lesson. The offender went overboard, did not use a paddle, it was another weapon. Possibly something from a workshop, metal tool. Nobody saw the offender do it. Appelgren took the rap for it.
And that's where police inquiries into Danny's account seemingly came to a halt. Mark and Dominic didn't hear back from the police. In fact, they didn't hear any more about it from anyone for years. Now remember, this was all happening in December 1990 and January 1991. Ross had just been released following his successful appeal, and his retrial didn't take place until May 1992.
Given the importance of what you passed on to the police, were you surprised not to be called to give evidence at Ross's second trial in 1992?
Correct, yeah.
I know what you're thinking. Here's a report of another inmate, A, confessing to ordering the hit on Darcy, B, naming the actual assailant, David, and C, saying Ross wasn't involved. How could it be Ross's lawyers didn't call Danny, Mark or Dominic as witnesses at the retrial? Well, the answer is simple, and you've heard it before. They say they weren't told about any of this. In fact, Ross says he didn't find out about Danny's claims until after he was convicted the second time. It came up by sheer chance in a discussion he had with Mark at Pāremoremo prison in March 1993. Ross later phoned journalist Keith Davies to explain what he'd learned.
An officer in Unit 3 one night was just sort of casually telling me about how he was given information and how he had passed it on to the police some 3 years previously. And it was the first time I'd ever heard about it. So
this is the actual recording of Ross's conversation with Keith that aired on TV3 in August 1993.
What do you consider to be the importance of this evidence, Ross?
Well, I think it's very important because it's answered a lot of questions which I've never known the answers to, and I've always been worried about, you know.
What was worrying you?
Well, I knew for a start that I'd never killed Darcy.
Ross asked Mark for the name of the cop he spoke with, and Mark said it might have been a Detective Jenkinson, maybe Peter Jenkinson, who headed the inquiry into Darcy's murder.
We talked some more about it, and I told my lawyers about it.
Ross's lawyer, Bob Hesketh, fired off a letter to the Crown seeking copies of any interviews police had conducted with Mark and Dominic. Chris Morris, one of the prosecutors at Ross's retrial, responded.
I have received advice from Detective Chief Inspector Peter Jenkinson that he has no recollection of interviewing prison officers Malcolm or Anthony, and there is no record of any interview with the two officers concerned.
Now, that's just not accurate. Police had the December 1990 job sheet from Detective Carpenter outlining his conversation with Mark. Not deterred, Ross's legal team interviewed Mark themselves. But by then, 3 years had passed since Danny's confession and Mark's conversation with the police. Mark was more hazy on who he'd spoken with, saying the cop's last name could have been Jamison or possibly Jenkinson. Still on this story, Keith Davies asked Peter Jenkinson on camera if he was the man Mark had phoned.
There's no conversation with the police by the prison officers 3 years ago, to my knowledge.
The police job sheet talks of them calling a Mr. Jamison or a Mr. Jenkinson.
They didn't speak to me.
I mean, why would they say this?
Oh, you have to ask them.
By this point, Keith had a copy of Detective Carpenter's job sheet recording his conversation with Mark.
Well, they do seem fairly emphatic that they called, don't they?
They are emphatic on the job sheet that they did speak to someone by that name. But all I can say is they didn't speak to me.
I showed Mark this interview with Peter Jenkinson.
The voice sounds very, very similar, the deep voice and that sort of stuff. It sounds very similar to the person that I would have been dealing with at the time.
The plot thickened in 1994 when Detective Carpenter saw an affidavit in which he stated,
"I cannot now recall precisely, but I believe I may have been directed to interview prison officer Anthony by Detective Chief Inspector Jenkinson."
Then a job sheet emerged that had been written several weeks before Ross's retrial. It said prosecutor Bruce Squire had asked police if Ross's lawyers had been provided with Detective Carpenter's record of his interview with Mark Anthony. The job sheet indicates a detective was assigned to carry out that very task. Now, the author of that job sheet was, wait for it, Peter Jenkinson. So at least in 1992, Jenkinson, on his own account, had knowledge of Carpenter's interview with Mark. But despite all this, Jenkinson stuck to his guns. He also filed an affidavit in 1994 stating,
"I have no recollection or record of having been contacted by a prison officer by the name of Anthony or Malcolm, nor do I have any recollection of directing Detective Sergeant Carpenter to interview either man."
Now, I find Jenkinson's denial a little hard to believe, given Mark and Detective Carpenter's recollections. But most significantly, Jenkinson's own job sheet describes he did know what he was now denying. Unfortunately, Jenkinson passed away years ago, so I can't clarify all of this with him. I asked Keith Davies what he'd made of Jenkinson's claim. He never spoke to Mark.
Did you, at the time, do you recall believing what he was telling you?
No. By then, I knew there was something really odd going on with this case. I couldn't understand why. And to this day, I don't. Why did they feel the necessary just to plonk it on Appelgren, when if they'd made some more inquiries, just, spent a few days asking pertinent people questions, they could have gone so much deeper into it.
Yeah.
But they didn't. It was, he's guilty, no matter what.
Now, in fairness to the police, when all of this emerged in mid-1993, detectives did go and take statements from both Mark and Dominic, as Ross recalled in a 1996 interview with Keith.
The police finally took these statements after much prompting from Bob Hesketh and the Crown.
Police then also spoke with Danny, who was back in Mount Eden prison yet again. That interview was, shall I say, a little more tense. When told by the detective that Dominic and Mark had given statements saying Danny admitted being responsible for killing Darcy, Danny responded,
"That's bullshit."
A point to make here, the detective's description of what Mark and Dominic said Danny told them, that he was responsible for killing Darcy, isn't entirely correct. Mark and Dominic actually said Danny told them he arranged for Darcy to be dealt to. There's a difference there, and one can see why Danny got riled up by the detective's version. The detective then read Mark and Dominic's accounts aloud to Danny.
"That's all lies. It didn't happen."
When pushed to offer something up so the police could investigate further, Danny said,
"No, that's your job. That's what you get paid for. The cops have been to see me about 5 times over this. I'm waiting to get called as a witness. Why should I tell you? What's in it for me? I've been promised things by other cops and been double-crossed."
As well as his clear denial of Mark and Dominic's accounts, there's another thing I found really interesting in what Danny said. He mentioned he'd been seen by police about 5 times regarding this case, and according to Danny at least, been promised things and been double-crossed. Now, I have no idea what Danny is referring to here. That's because, if he's been truthful that the cops spoke to him about 5 times, well, I haven't seen records of 5 conversations. Nor have Ross's lawyers. I have found records of police talking to Danny 3 times, all of which I've covered in this episode. His first interview the day after the murder, his chat with Detective Carpenter in January 1991, and finally his tense meeting with police in 1993. Now, Danny may just have been exaggerating, just fobbing off the accusations, but it possibly leaves 2 other interviews unaccounted for. And for me, that's a big deal, particularly given the history of non-disclosure problems in Ross's case, and Danny's own reported confession to ordering Darcy's assault. Back in 1993, when Bob Hesketh learned of Danny's denials, he thought Danny might be more open with someone who wasn't a cop. Bob sought out Marie Dyberg, one of New Zealand's best-known inexperienced defence lawyers.
I was certainly approached by the defence team to start with to say, look, there's somebody who's come forward, a prison inmate who says that they have really good evidence that is supportive of the defence case.
In August 1993, Marie interviewed Danny at Mount Eden Prison and had him prepare an affidavit. Journalist Keith Davies interviewed Marie after her meeting with Danny.
You have an affidavit. What is the significance of this?
What it is saying is that the prisoner had a conversation with two prison officers at Parimarimu prison, that in that he talked about who set up and who was responsible for the death of Te Hira. It was not Appelgren. It involved two other people, but that's as far as it goes. There's no comment made about whether what has been said is true or false.
But he doesn't say it's false.
No, he does not say it's false.
I have a copy of Danny's affidavit. As Marie described, Danny confirmed he spoke with Mark Anthony and Dominic Malcolm about who was responsible for Darcy's death, but went on to say,
I do not want to say anything about why I said what I did, nor make any comment about whether what I saw was true or false.
It's understandable Danny chose his words carefully. After all, he'd allegedly implicated himself in Darcy's murder. Here's Marie Dyberg again in that 1993 interview.
As I understand it from the prisoner, the police went to see him a month ago and have said that should the facts come together, then he himself, the prisoner, will be charged with murder.
Were they putting pressure on him?
I wasn't present, but I would think that would certainly put pressure on anyone.
Keith put Danny's claims of police pressure to Peter Jenkinson.
Did your police officers intimidate him like that?
No.
What remained unclear to Ross, as he said in a letter to Bob Hesketh, was why police hadn't told them about Danny's confession before the retrial.
This information should have been made available to us. It's not for the police to decide whether the information is true. It's up to the courts and jury. Why did the police not pursue this information? These prison officers were so concerned they contacted the police.
In his interview with Keith Davies, Jenkinson suggested that police simply hadn't thought Danny's confession was reliable.
I mean, do you have any doubt about whether or not what these prison officers are saying is correct?
The prison officers gave us a date of when, approximate date when this took place. The inmate who was alleged to have made this comment to them was not even in Parimarimu at that time.
They're vague about the date, aren't they?
I accept that.
Do you think that there is room that this might have thrown some doubt on this conviction?
I personally don't think so.
You're convinced that justice was done?
Yes.
Now, after this interview aired, Mark and Dominic told Ross's lawyers they believed their discussion with Danny occurred the weekend before Danny was released from prison. According to prison records, Danny was let out on the 12th of November 1990. Now remember, Mark also said that the conversation with Danny occurred when there had been a lot of media coverage about Ross's conviction being quashed. That decision was handed down on the 8th of November 1990, which means the Danny conversation likely took place between the 8th and the 12th of November. This all meant Mark and Dominic's conversation with Danny could have occurred when they said it took place. Decades on, neither Mark nor Dominic are convinced police adequately investigated the information they passed on about Danny.
They were trying to make a conviction, and regardless of whether the guy did it or not, they were going to get that conviction anyway.
I thought it was justified for the police to take it further, and because they didn't, then I'd have to say that the police are culpable and not doing the job properly. That's my view, mate.
The analogy is, for me, is if someone is trying to prove a theory, you get the person who's trying to prove a theory the honest way by weighing up the pros and cons, and then you get the person trying to prove a theory who gets rid of anything that goes against what they're trying to prove to affirm their theory.
And so do you think Ross Appelgren was rightfully convicted or wrongfully convicted?
Absolutely wrongfully. It was, I believe, common knowledge within the staff there that the wrong person was got.
I felt that the guy was innocent of what he'd been convicted of. Having said that, I thought I was powerless to be able to do anything about it, other than what I'd done.
Marie Dyberg, who also spoke with Danny in 1993, is now Marie Dyberg, KC. She still works as a defence lawyer. Marie agreed to speak with us about her interactions with Danny.
I found him credible enough that there was nothing I could point to that showed was inconsistent, outrageous, couldn't be believed. So in my view, on the balance of probabilities, it was reliable enough for me to take the affidavit.
Why then, given the stakes involved, did she think Danny said what he said?
It was the guilt of the wrong person, somebody who's innocent being convicted, and he said that is what weighed heavily with him.
As she did at the time, Marie still believes the evidence about Danny's confession should have been presented at Ross's retrial.
I would have thought that it would be gold in the hands of defence to actually have someone who has said, I gave the order for the hit on the deceased, only for a bash but not for him to be killed, would have been very powerful evidence.
Which brings me back to one of the most crucial questions about all of this. Was all this evidence about Danny actually disclosed to the defence back in 1992? We know the police files contained a record of Detective Paul Carpenter's December 1990 interview with Nark and his conversation with Danny in January 1991. We also have Peter Jenkinson's job sheet that I mentioned earlier, the one that said a detective was assigned to provide Carpenter's interview to Ross's legal team. That detective later said it was made available along with other police documents. Ross's lawyers, Simon Lockhart and Bob Hesketh, filed affidavits responding to that suggestion. Here's what Lockhart said.
I find it hard to accept that such a significant and important document would have been completely overlooked by either myself or Mr. Hesketh.
While Hesketh replied, and I quote, all I can say is that had I seen that job sheet during my visit to the police station on the 9th of July 1991, it would have glowed like a beacon, and its significance would have been immediate and obvious. For her part, Marie Dyberg doesn't buy the police and Crown's claim that the evidence about Danny was handed over to the defence. In this next clip, Marie refers to Danny as the informant.
Well, it seems to me to be a miscarriage of justice because what we have plainly and simply very relevant information that could have been and should have been made available to the defence was not given. Now, even if the informant had resiled from what he had said initially for whatever reason, nonetheless, you might still call that person. And then you might test the reasons why they subsequently resile from what they have said. So that was such potent evidence that should have been made available and was not, and could easily have brought about a different verdict.
It was for all these reasons that Bob Hesketh ended up filing another petition on behalf of Ross, his third, to the Governor-General in October 1993. Of course, this was the same legal process Ross used to get his first conviction quashed in 1990, after the Crown withheld key evidence at the first trial. Against all the odds, on the 29th of April 1994, Ross's petition was granted on the advice of the then Justice Minister, Doug Graham. The Governor-General's referral stated it appeared the evidence of Danny's confession had not been disclosed to Ross or his lawyers before the retrial. And
it appears that evidence is available which could lead the Court of Appeal to the conclusion that the trial was unsatisfactory and that a miscarriage of justice might have occurred.
Ross was incredibly relieved, but as he told Keith Davies in this 1994 interview for TV3, he was also angry.
2 prison officers approached the police with fresh evidence, but the police didn't follow that up. Why do you think that happened?
I think it was just a case that they had someone they didn't want any problems, and they just pushed it under the carpet.
How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel bloody wild. That they can do that and get away with it.
Ross's lawyer, Bob Hesketh, told the New Zealand Herald that for Ross to have had one successful petition was rare. To have two was unheard of. But here's the thing. Despite the Governor-General referring Ross's case back to the Court of Appeal in May 1994, more than 30 years on, it is yet to be heard. We'll find out how that happened in the final episode of this series, when the story finally arrives in the present day. It won't surprise you to know I was keen to speak to Danny, the man whose confession gave Ross one more chance to have his conviction overturned. It took me months of digging, but eventually I found an address for him and went and knocked on the door. A person answered and told me that yes, Danny lived there, but he wasn't home. I left a message asking for him to call me. And it's regarding a guy called Ross Appelgren. Appelgren. Thanks a lot, man. Cheers. Okay, so yeah, fingers crossed he gives me a call. Well, yeah, the call never came. If I'm honest, I'm not really shocked. Danny doesn't know me from a bar of soap. It made me think though, would Danny be prepared to speak with someone he does know?
So yeah, we go straight.
That's Wheki Taito giving me directions. Wheki has been a great source of information for me about life as an inmate in Mount Eden Prison back in the 80s.
Do you know how to get to Papakura from here?
Yeah. Oh, sweet. Wheki's Twitter bio neatly describes his life's journey. Ex-gang member, ex-career criminal, now university graduate with a degree in sociology. And helpfully for me, he knew Danny back in the day.
Oh, from jail. Yeah, I did a lay with him for a few years. It was just, you know, always got something to say, always running his mouth off. He hung out with us, just doing enough running around for us, if you like.
What do you make of his? So he claimed that Ross wasn't involved, told two prison guards, and seems to have suggested that he may have ordered the hit on Te Hira, but that the offender had gone overboard.
Yeah, that's it. Him ordering a hit? Yeah, nah. Yeah, nah. Yeah, he couldn't order a fish and chip with the takeaway bar. I don't believe that for 1 second that he'd done that. It's incredible that, you know, that those of us that knew him back in that era would ever think that he had the ability to order a hit.
I then asked Wheki about his thoughts on David, the inmate Danny said had actually struck Darcy.
Those are the guys that would have been able to do it. You know, they with no problems at all. You know, we wouldn't even bring an eyelid. And I do agree. I do agree in terms of what I read about going overboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
Of course, the best way to work out if what Danny was saying stacked up was to actually talk to him. We pulled up outside his address. So you're just going to ask him straight up?
Oh, well, we'll see how he is. Yeah, I don't know. I'll take it by
play it by you?
Yeah. See how he is. Because he's getting on. He'd be my age now.
Because how long would it have been since you've seen him?
Since back then.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right. But you think he'll remember you?
Well, we'll see. Yeah, no doubt he will.
Yeah. Okay.
I leave a lasting impression.
Wheki is certainly not wrong on that count. He's a big dude. While I wait in the car, Wheki goes and knocks on the door. It's not long before he's back, though.
Yeah, nobody stays here now.
What's that?
Nobody stays here now.
How do you know?
Hey?
How do you know? Oh, there's no one there.
Drive past and you'll see.
As we slowly drive by, it's clear what Wheki is saying. The rooms in Danny's now former flat were empty. There was also a pile of rubbish on the front lawn.
Oh, it's been emptied.
Yep. All the shit's outside.
So it's gone. Yeah, it's 0 from 2. Back to the drawing board, I think.
A neighbour later told me Danny had moved out several days earlier. Unfortunately for me, he didn't know where Danny had gone. That means neither do I. Look, I totally understood why Danny didn't engage with me. I mean, here I was, appearing out of the blue, asking questions about a chapter in Danny's life he's probably put behind him. But the truth is, I hope Danny does speak, at least to someone he trusts. After all, the Governor-General decided the evidence of Danny's apparent confession meant an appeal court might rule Ross was the subject of a miscarriage of justice. And that's why this all still matters, because legally speaking, Ross's conviction still hangs in limbo, with an appeal still pending, surrounded by unanswered questions. As we edge closer to the end of this story, there is one other person who could shine a light on what happened that day in the kitchen and all the years since.
Not sure what reception I'm going to get. It could be any number of things. It could be, yeah, g'day, or nah, piss off.
Someone whose testimony and truthfulness have been challenged again and again, in this series, but in the courts too. I really want to look him in the eye and ask the many questions I have to see for myself if he can be trusted or not. In the next episode, I track down the Crown's star witness, Ernie. I finally get to talk to him, face to face.
I'm a little bit floored, to be honest. Only because I'm not too sure what. I certainly didn't expect that.
That's coming up in the next episode of Nark. Thanks for listening to Nark, hosted and written by me, Mike Wesley Smith. I'm also extremely grateful to everyone who spoke with me for this podcast, especially Suzanne Young and Ross Appelgren. Follow and listen to Nark wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've enjoyed it, use the share button to recommend it to a friend. Some more acknowledgements. A big thanks to RNZ journalist Guy Espiner, who interviewed Marie Dyberg KC for this episode. To Ngā Taonga and Mediaworks for some of the archival audio, and to the voice actors who helped bring some of the characters in this episode to life. Truls Somerville, David Reed, Hamish Webber, Jonathan Bell, Will Plummer, Craig Genty, Glenn Scanlon and Elliot Childs. The RNZ producers who worked on this episode were Liz Garton and Justin Gregory. The audio engineer was Mark Chesterman. Thanks also to Steve Burridge and Jeremy Ansell for the studio wrangling, and to Kevin Golding for opening the doors to me every week after hours. Graphics were designed by Amrita Marks, and the shorthand page where you can find more information on this story was made by Hingyi Kong. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/nark. Tim Watkin is RNZ's Executive Editor Audio, and Brianna Uritich-Gregg is the Production Coordinator. You can find more of RNZ's great podcasts like The Last Voyage of the Rainbow Warrior on the RNZ website rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Check them out. Bye for now.